Hello?
Hey, Robin. We can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear us okay?
Yep.
Okay. I just asked that if you could stay on mute during the meeting until, well, unless you need to speak, obviously, but when your turn is to speak, and we should be good.
Okay. I'll have to figure out how to go back and forth between those two because the mute button doesn't show up on my screen.
Okay, well, you don't have to. You want me to mute you until it's your turn?
Okay. No, I just figured out how to get it back, so that's fine.
Okay. And if you have any issues, this is Greg, just shoot me an email.
Okay, that's fine. I'll do that. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself.
Perfect. Thank you.
We ready? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming. My name is Michael Kirsch, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at American Institutes for Research. And I want to thank everybody for coming to today's session entitled Cognitive Training for Older Adults, Does It Work?, which is being sponsored by AIR Center on Aging. For those of you who are not familiar with AIR, we're a nonprofit organization whose mission is to apply the best behavioral and social science research towards improving people's lives, especially the disadvantaged. We believe in creating strong links between research and application, and focus our work across the full life course of individuals from early childhood to old age, as today's discussion will highlight. I'd like to introduce the director of AIR Center on Aging and also a fellow here at AIR, Dr. Marilyn Moon. She's a nationally known economist and expert in areas of Medicare, healthcare financing, consumer health, and aging. She'll share more about the focus on the Center of Aging, and serve as the moderator for today's session. For those of you who are joining us remotely or online, we will be taking questions via Twitter at #AIRAging. And so once again, thank you for attending today's session, and I'll turn it over to Marilyn.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. We're very glad to have you here today. This is an important area, as you might imagine. People are not only concerned about what happens at the end of life and cognitive issues, but also staying active and energized as long as possible. And this has become an area where I think there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of commercial activity as well as interest, and that always means that you get a lot of attention to these kinds of issues. We're very fortunate today to have a nice panel of experts who are going to talk about this. This is one of many things that the Center on Aging is trying to do these days. As a small part of AIR, our goal is to try to highlight and facilitate discussions about aging issues, not just for people over the age of 65, but aging in a broader context, and certainly cognitive issues fall into that. We also do work in the workforce area, in the health area, and other related aspects of aging issues. So you can watch for us on AIR's website, and you'll see there were a number of handouts of some things that we've been doing recently. The first panelist today is going to be George Riebach, who is one of our own, as we like to say. He is a member of AIR and is one of the Institute Fellows here and works with me on the Center on Aging. George has a particular and specialized interest in these issues, and so he is particularly adept at working on these areas. He put together this panel today, so he should get full credit for this. George is also affiliated with the Johns Hopkins University, where he does a lot of research in this area. I'm going to introduce the other panelists as well so that we can just get to it quickly. We are going to ask that you hold any questions that you might have until the end of the presentations, unless they are really for purposes of clarification, that something is just not clear. The other panelists are going to be Michelle Carlson, who's here with us today. Michelle is an associate professor in the Center on Aging and Health, also at Johns Hopkins University. And Tom Gentry, an associate professor of occupational therapy at VCU. We also have, but on the phone today, Robin Lee West. Robin is a professor of everyday memory and aging at the University of Florida, and as a new grandmother, so she's chosen to stay in Florida, which I think makes her a very rational researcher, as well as one who will be interesting. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce George to get us started. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Marilyn, and hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for coming out today, and thank you to all of those who are joining us on live stream today. I'm going to start off our session by addressing the main topical area of the panel today on cognitive training for older adults, and does it work? And as many of you probably already growth in this area over the last several years. This first slide shows here on the left the exponential growth that has occurred in cognitive training research over the last 2 decades, particularly the last decade, such that in the last few years, on average, more than 500 studies appear in the research literature. This graph was taken from a Scopus search where they searched on terms like cognitive training, cognitive remediation, cognitive rehabilitation, and just the number of studies coming out yearly now is phenomenal. It's really hard to even keep up if you're doing work in this area. On the right, you see a slide from a meta-analysis of the memory training literature that some of our colleagues did. Alden Gross was the lead on this, where we went back to the 1970s and looked at over 400 studies that had been done on memory training. And most of those studies were done over the last 20 years or so. And so we find that this is really kind of a golden age in terms of cognitive training, and there's more and more research coming out all the time. So the question often arises, what is cognitive training? And what it is not. And when we refer to cognitive training, generally we're referring to guided practice on a set of standardized tasks related to memory, attention, or other brain functions. And these exercises usually are repetitive in nature, and they are targeted often at a single target cognitive ability, like memory performance, or multiple cognitive abilities like memory and abstract reasoning ability. The training may be computer-based or delivered in person, or to individuals or small groups. Often it's adaptive, such that the more expert you become, the harder the problems get to be. And oftentimes the training is accompanied by education around what memory is, or general facts about aging. So there can be other components involved in the training. All the training is based on the basic premise that the brain can change for the better. And we've known from both animal research and studies on humans that there is evidence for considerable plasticity all across the lifespan, even into late old age. Now, when we say cognitive training, we're not just referring to brain games or puzzles, like a crossword puzzle or Sudoku, even though those are very enjoyable and many of us do those things. Cognitive training is not quite like that. It's not like a one-shot vaccine that is going to inoculate you against all further brain decline. That cognitive training really is a set of very structured exercises that are based on usually theoretical principles. So why is cognitive training important? Well, there are a variety of factors that have really fueled the interest in this area. First of all, of course, is the global aging of the population, that here, even in the US, 20% of the population by 2030 is going to be 65 and older. So there is this rapidly growing older population. Cognitive decline has emerged in several surveys as the single most feared aspect of growing older. It even trumps worries about physical decline, that people are worried about cognitive decline. It's not only a worry, but it's also very costly in terms of leading to disability and perhaps later on into dementia. There have been drug trials that have been done that are disappointing, looking at things like nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs and statins, and other drugs that just have not led to the effects that have been promised. And then we know from from studies that cognitive impairments heavily affect the aging population. There's some data from the Adams study, a sub-study of the HRS data set that Brenda Plassman and her colleagues reported that upwards of almost 25% of people 70 years of age or older have some sort of impairment cognitively without dementia. That said, the vast majority of older people are functioning cognitively normally, but they're, are a subset of the population that are experiencing serious cognitive declines. And over 5 million people here in the U.S. Have Alzheimer's disease, and that number is expected to triple by 2050. So the million-dollar question is, does cognitive training work? And the simple answer is, yes, it does. So we have had numerous research trials that have shown immediate benefits, and there have been several large meta-analyses done on trials, and it looks like there is a growing body of evidence. But there are big questions that remain about the practical impact of these benefits on important everyday life tasks such as medication management, health and financial decision-making. If you go through a cognitive training program, will it help you avoid and become less susceptible to financial fraud, for example, or make more informed decisions about health insurance purchases? How long do the effects last? And other questions arise. Does it have potential to, quote, cure or prevent Alzheimer's disease or help dementia patients? We don't have evidence yet that it does, but it's certainly a key question driving a lot of the interest in this area. So as Dr. Moon mentioned, there's been an incredible growth in the commercial around cognitive training that's paralleled the rise in interest in the research. And there have been some concerns raised by the scientific community about the claims being made that overreach the data in many cases and make promises about doing things like preventing dementia or improving your memory to the point where you'll never forget anything again, or making you a smarter person. And so these claims have come under close scrutiny, and a group of investigators issued and signed a statement called the Stanford Consensus Statement that came out last fall that says that, quoting here, that the claim that brain games offer consumers a scientifically grounded avenue to reduce or reverse cognitive decline when there is no compelling scientific evidence to suggest that they do. And so they're worried that this promise of magic bullet or silver bullet is going to really detract from the best evidence to date that really the key to cognitive health in old age is embedded within a healthy lifestyle, that the more engaged you are and the long-term effects of healthy living, that is going to exceed doing a particular brain game. In terms of its effect. And they encourage the continued careful research and validation in this field to validate the claims being made about these brain games. And so we really need to engage in science that's going to keep up with the hype of some of the producers of some of these brain games. And so there are other scientists who think that maybe this statement went a little bit too far and ignored some of the evidence, scientific evidence for the benefits of cognitive training, and sort of lumps all cognitive training together. But that said, I think we can all agree that doing nothing cognitively over your life's course is not a good prescription for good cognitive health later on. So there's going to be continued interest and activity in this area. So this last slide just frames the main issues in this area. And this is not an exhaustive list, but it's certainly, I think, some of the key points that need to be addressed. One is identifying conditions leading to transfer of cognitive training to everyday tasks. In other words, if you're training people on a particular task, you don't want to just get better on that task. You want to see if it generalizes or transfers to important everyday life activities. So that is is a major issue in this field, and we know from over 100 years of scientific research in this topic that it's very, very hard to get transfer, that the effects often are very target specific, and so that becomes a very important question, and it's certainly a question that has to be applied when you're evaluating claims made about the everyday these commercial brain training programs. Maximizing gains from cognitive training that will be sustained over time is another issue. How do we make sure that these gains are large gains? A lot of them are very modest gains. They don't always show up in every study. And the more that we can improve the effectiveness of these training tools, the more likely they are to sustain effects over time, and the more likely you are to see transfer to everyday abilities. Determining what the optimal dose or frequency of cognitive training, what's responsible for the training-related benefits, what are the mechanisms, and how often do you need to do cognitive training? Is once or twice a week enough? Should I space out the training? Should I do it all at one time? We really don't know what the appropriate dosage and frequency is. It's, in a lot of regards, it's like the exercise, recommendations around physical exercise. What is for the optimal dose? We don't know. How can we improve the accessibility or reach of these cognitive training interventions? We want to make sure that people that have limited education or low literacy or may not be able to access programs we don't want to just have programs for what I call the wired well, the people that are connected to the internet who can access the programs. We want to make sure that everybody has access to these programs, can afford them, and are able to use the programs. And then finally, adapting the cognitive training to individual needs, abilities, and motivations, and making it more culturally appropriate. How do we really personalize cognitive training? Just like personalized medicine, how do we adapt training to individual needs? So with that, I'm going to close and turn over the podium to Dr. Carlson.
Thank you, and thank you to Marilyn and George and the organizers for inviting me here. I think I'll start with a brief introduction, and hopefully you remember there are 2 websites for more information. Just tapping the surface of what I'll share with you right now and hope that you'll be hungry for more. So what do we know? We know, I'm going to switch a bit now from cognitive training to kind of activity in the wild, so to speak, in our everyday lives, and how do we incorporate it, kind of addressing some of the points that George mentioned with accessibility, sustainability, and so forth. Well, what we know about physical activity is voluminous in the last 10 years. We know it's good for your cognitive health. We know that in older adults, as well as children. We know that it's good for reducing risk for dementia, which is critically important for our public health care and for families and individuals. And we know that actually under the skin, below the scalp, that we're showing benefits at the level of brain function and brain structure. So we see that it's good for us. So how do we do it? And how do we get it in our everyday lives? Well, I'd like to introduce you to 2 models that stem from the animal literature, which has been looking at activity for decades, if not like 50 years or more. And I show you on the left panel a really enriched environment. So think of it as Georgetown across the street, or a mall or something. And you have lots of activity, of colorfulness, you have lots of cognitive stimulation, and those corks, by the way, are meant to be pulled out by the little critters. So that's cognitively challenging. They've got physical activity, and they've got buddies. So you have cognitive, physical, and social engagement. It's not prescribed. It's available to you to use at your disposal. And on the right, you have saying, well, why aren't I over there? How do I get over there? And so these are models that we can't implement in human studies. We can't put people into these environments and design a randomized control trial, but we can look at opportunities for increasing activity as a mechanism for transferring to everyday life and independence. And in thinking about that, I think the challenge of merging what we know about human studies on activity with what we know in animal models and other natural observational studies is that of cognitive training and is important, but we do see limited transfer to thinking about how that improves our day-to-day lives, and we need to do more to understand it. We also know we're fighting an uphill battle, and that as we age and get older, not just humans, all animals right down to the worm, get less physically active. So we're facing an uphill climb. How activity more interesting and fun, even as we do it less but need it more. Our lexicon also reinforces this. When is the last time you asked your friend or your neighbor next door, do you want to come out and play at lunch? And I think that we should think about that. That might be a prescription. Working out doesn't sound as much fun. And also, our current physical activity guidelines, it turns out, at least in older adults, are very hard to reach. We're not reaching those guidelines of 90 minutes of walking exercise per week. So I wanted to introduce you to some findings that we're looking at with George and I in a study. And this is really just one data slide to show you that what I want to persuade you about is maybe we don't need to go high. Maybe we need to think about modest changes in our day-to-day lives. So what if we just looked at people who show using objective step activity measures, pedometers, things of that nature, Fitbit? What if we looked at individuals to show that even a few thousand steps more per day, 1,000 steps more per day, maybe it matters. Maybe we don't have to exercise and develop a sweat. Maybe we need to think about small changes in order to attain sustainability and large-scale implementation. So this shows you some data we just recently published showing that when we look at a brain structure called the hippocampus, which is really important to memory and to risk for Alzheimer's disease and dementias of aging, we find that even modestly higher levels of walking activity per day are related to larger hippocampal volume. And that's sort of offers some promise for those of us like me who don't like to put on my spandex and work up a sweat. Maybe I can just walk further from the parking garage, park a little further away. How do we make exercise and activity like that enjoyable? And I think that's one of our challenges going forward. How do we make it fun, accessible to all individuals, regardless of where you live and what your resources may be? So my student put this together, and it shows how we might be able to incorporate physical, cognitive, and social engagement. You're talking with your friend while you run, very hard, but maybe while you walk. You're carrying your broccoli, what's good for you, your green food. And there's one more aspect to this that I won't talk about today, but maybe you can identify it. It's in the upper left corner, vitamin D in the sun. And so perhaps these things matter as we're thinking about how it impacts our cognitive health. What I'd like to talk and end with is thinking about the glue that binds us. How do we increase activity? And one way to think about doing that to promote cognitive health and brain health is to think about physical activity in the pursuit of social engagement. We're all built and wired over centuries and millennia to be social. There are a number of really interesting books and papers that really make this point better than I can today. But I think it's a topic that lends itself to further study. And one model for that George and I have worked on for a decade and a half is a program that tries to incorporate social engagement with purpose. So what if we can increase your social, cognitive, and physical activity in order to promote your health, cognitive health, by asking you to help others, by engaging you and getting you to move in the pursuit of someone else's benefit or in an altruistic manner. So this program, which I won't describe in detail now, but I'd be happy, as well as George, to take questions later, is meant to engage older adults in their communities to identify the needs of a younger generation. So it's an intergenerational program where we train and help older adults to place them in teams in elementary schools, and then empower them to learn how to use the Dewey Decimal System, how to help children pick age-appropriate books. And in that process, they work with the teachers. They don't replace teachers, they assist the teachers in helping children to read to learn. And learning to read at the ages of K through 3 is critical in order to shape their trajectory so that they can then read to learn going forward. So with that, I think in conclusion, I'd like us to think about how we can complement individual programs, cognitive training and the like, which are very accessible. I love George's comment about a wired well generation. And I think that what we need to do is also think about how how we might reach people in a different way, maybe not for their own personal health promotion only, but also, again, what George and I do is think about how we can appeal to what's getting better with aging. We reframe aging as a time in which we have a lifetime of accumulated wisdom, and we can use that to give back to a younger or any other generation, our own generation. And that in that pursuit of that, we might find ourselves reframing not only what it means to age well, but also what maybe aging will become perhaps less pejorative and more associated with wisdom, time, and experience, all of those things that we are improving with time. Thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this issue that is becoming so important as our population ages and aspires to do so in good health. I'm a teacher, researcher, and practitioner in the field of occupational therapy, and I spent my career specializing in cognitive rehabilitation. The topic here today is very important to my work. We occupational therapists say that we help our clients develop skills for the job of living. Our profession has always been predicated on supporting people to pursue purposeful activity that has meaning to them. And we've accumulated a library of evidence, including the well-known Well Elderly study, that shows that this is an important key to well-being, health, and cognitive function. One of the things that I've just heard from George and Michelle's conversation is there seems to be a magic elixir, and there's a lot of research that hasn't connected all of those dots yet, seems to support the idea that the best way to cognitive health is to take the time, maybe every month or every year, to learn something new that involves movement and other people. That's better than doing a crossword puzzle. That seems to be the magic trick, and their research and our research supports that. The important thing for all of us to keep in mind in today's discussion is this. When you provide a treatment, I'm sorry, I'm not doing my slides, am I? There we go. Okay. When you provide a treatment, what is your target? If your target is improved scores on formal tests of memory or attention, then some of the popular cognitive training plans work. But the research has been clear about the target that concerns me. So far, no study has shown that cognitive training significantly improves how people with even mild cognitive impairment perform in their everyday lives. As an OT, that's my target. In this area, cognitive training so far fails. But I teach and research and practice strategies that do impact everyday function. For example, a paradigm we OTs use is the person-environment occupation model. Using this model, a clinician examines the abilities and interests of the person, the meaningful activities they are trying to perform, and the environment that supports or holds back that effort. My effort as a therapist can address any of those three circles. Here's an example of how that can work. This is one of my research subjects, a young man with autism. He is pursuing a job as a file clerk in a hospital. He chose this job because it has few distractions and is quite routine. But as you can see here, he faces a number of challenges. At first, I taught him to use an iPod Touch as a reminder tool. You and I set reminders for ourselves on our mobile devices, but people with cognitive impairment may use them much more frequently. Look at the 11 reminders this worker uses just to get through his day. The device helps in other ways too. The young man does not know how to alphabetize, yet he's a file clerk. So I added an instructional slideshow to his iPod Touch to show him how. If he needs more help, he can check in with his supervisor using FaceTime video chat. A strong body of evidence supports the use of mobile technologies to help people with cognitive challenges function better in their everyday lives. My lab has researched the use of mobile devices in this way with subjects up to age 87. They work. At home, mobile devices can readily be linked to smart home technologies such as this pill box that contacts a caregiver if dad forgets to take his medications, a cook stop device that turns off the stove if you forget to, and passive monitors that track a person through the home, apprising off-site caregivers of deviations in daily routines that may signal a health problem or a fall. These tools are becoming more affordable, but they are not typically covered by insurance. Yet, they can help you age in place if your cognitive status changes. To change pace for a second here. Here is your brain, your 3-pound miracle. We typically think of it as a mass of microscopic spaghetti, neurons, that do our thinking for us. We believe that pursuing meaningful activity supports neuronal health. But the brain is more than neurons. In fact, it is largely a vascular structure made up of blood vessels that supply oxygen to our computer. If you could remove everything but those blood vessels from the brain, this is what it would look like. So using this slide as our evidence, it makes sense that anything that promotes cardiovascular health, what we call heart health, will support cognitive function. And we know that the government recommends all of these things for us. This is what's called a heart-healthy lifestyle. Not smoking, activity, exercise, seeing your doctor once a year, a healthy diet, good sleep, and stress reduction. In another study, I used this evidence to help Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans with mild brain injuries and post-traumatic stress disorder, all of whom were trying to settle into lives at home after combat. Our team outfitted them with sleep and activity trackers and provided iPhones with apps that track their moods. We used that real-time data to recommend lifestyle changes that help them manage their everyday lives better. This is what I teach, research, and practice, therapies that we know work to maintain healthy brains and engagement in everyday life, tools and strategies that support meaningful activity and a heart-healthy lifestyle. While I believe there is potential for cognitive training programs to help, they will work better if coupled with the therapies discussed here, especially for people who already show evidence of cognitive decline. I would like to see policy that supports healthy living, the role of rehabilitation therapists in wellness promotion, and improved access to assistive technologies for all. Thank you all so much.
And Robin, are you on the phone?
I am.
You're up.
Okay. Very pleased to be with you all today. And I'm going to focus my talk on the issue of public policy and translating some of what you've learned today to everyday life if possible. You've heard that cognitive training works. You've heard that engagement works. And you've heard that assistive devices can help those who have higher level needs. In other words, staying active, staying mentally active is just as important as staying physically active. And this is something that is within reach of people at many different levels. So my goal here is to try to talk about how we can encourage our public policy individuals to move forward in ways that will help. And if someone will go to the next slide for me, please. Okay. So we want to get the message out to people who set public policy that we need to focus on the prevention of decline. And this means we want to delay decline as much as possible for individuals. We know that a lot of older adults are having normal changes that are not dementia-based, but we want to maximize their ability to perform in their everyday lives, and we want to reduce the possibility of early decline. That means we need to focus on the importance of activity and engagement and get the message out that they need to be mentally active and not just physically active. We need to focus on activities that we encourage people to do that are both motivating and challenging. And this is what's important about what Michelle was saying about the social factors, because the social engagement is something that can increase the motivation for people to do the more challenging activities. This is why training often works, because it's a structured social program. And this is why an engagement program that brings people out in the community to work with others can also be important, because it provides that motivation to continue to be cognitively active, but it also provides a bit of cognitive challenge to help them go beyond where they are now. I would love to see, for example, some public service announcements on exercise that focus on both physical and mental exercise. Many older adults know, even though as Michelle said, they don't always follow the exercise prescriptions. They know that there is an exercise prescription that they should be following and that they will be healthier if they follow it. But at this point in our lives, most older adults have not heard the message that there should be a mental exercise prescription, that they should be mentally active. And it would be wonderful if we could work to define what this prescription would be for mental activity and encourage people to keep going, to move their minds and move their bodies. And this would be very helpful as a message to get out to help people to implement some of these suggestions in their everyday lives. On the next slide, I talk about some possible ways that we could fund these programs if insurance that is given to both physicians and psychologists allows them to give recommended prescriptions to people for not just physical exercise, but for mental exercise. And it says here that these things are free, but I understand that free is very hard to get. So maybe we can get people to provide insurance companies to provide discounts for older adults who adopt training programs that have evidence for them, research-based training programs, self-help books that have been tested and shown to work, courses that are offered through various resource groups, which I will tell you about in a minute, and get the insurance companies to give discounts for health insurance to people who maintain their cognitive health as well as their physical health. This would be wonderful, especially if we could provide reimbursements for some of those very structured training programs that are evidence-based that we know will work to improve mental health. On the next slide, I'd like to talk a little bit more about how this translates to everyday life. First of all, we should encourage people to train them. One of the interesting points that Dr. Gentry raised is that we have difficulty with transfer of memory training. Absolutely convinced of this from decades of research. It's very hard to work on one thing and have it transfer to some other skill. So why not encourage people to train themselves on those skills that they want to improve? If they want to improve their ability to find where they put things, then they should look for a resource, look for a program that focuses on that. If they want to improve their ability to remember names, which many people often tell me in my training programs, we should encourage them to find a program or find a resource or an online program that focuses on that. Have them work on those things that they need to improve, and perhaps to find assistive devices that would help them to do that if they have more extensive challenges. It's clear that we are in a situation now where people are bombarded with ads from programs that have some benefits, but they often have false claims saying that they transfer to everyday memory, and they're not teaching people on everyday memory. And so we want to be able to give information to older adults about what they can do in their own homes to practice those skills that they would like to work on. I did provide a handout here that I have used, and if you have a chance to look at it later, the front page sort of talks in general about how you can maintain your cognitive health, and this relates to some of the things that Dr. Gentry mentioned in terms of health and nutrition and maintaining a positive attitude. And the second page talks about specific things you can do and practice and work on to for whatever skill that you want to improve in terms of your memory, using association, using cues, whatever. And what I'd like to encourage people to do in terms of identifying how we can help older adults to get to this place where they can do these things in their home and do it in their own lives, I'd like to mention that there are a number of public resources that are extremely helpful for this. And we could hopefully partner as cognitive experts with those public resources to get them to put out the word and put out training program recommendations, and perhaps even put out direct training programs themselves that older adults can reach out and find that can help them with those everyday skills that they would like to work on. We could ask the National Council on Aging, the American Association of Retired Persons, the area agencies on aging to provide brochures that list research-based and evidence-based programs that older adults can use who are seeking that more structured training. And they can hopefully co-partner with cognitive psychologists to find and test new solutions that are targeted for the groups that they serve, which are a very wide range of abilities, as you know. So we need to work on ways to get out the information to seniors and to people who work with seniors that cognitive training works, that they need to maintain cognitive activity as much as possible in all the different ways that we've talked about it here. And we also need to develop specific programs that can be delivered in the community to people that are in the community with their specific needs that can focus more on everyday kinds of skills. I am currently talking to the National Council on Aging about the possibility of developing a memory training program for them that can be distributed to very widely around the country. They already have 60 sites in their aging mastery program, but they don't have a memory training component. And this is the kind of thing that I'd like to see happen, to get the word out to people about ways they can improve their cognitive ability, both in structured programs and in less structured programs. Get out of the house, go to a group, and have some fun learning a new memory skill. Thanks very much.
I'd like to ask the members of the panel to come up and sit up here so that we can have a little bit first of a discussion amongst the panel members, and then we'll open it up to questions from you all. I heard a couple of things in the talk today that I thought were really interesting. Last November, George and others were met here in this room and talked a lot about the research and all the technical things that are going on, and how do we reproduce the research and make sure that things are working, and that we know what works and doesn't work. Today, I heard much more of a practical and kind of low-key approach of what can we do practically. What can individuals think about doing, and what works and what doesn't work from a very practical standpoint. And one of the things that really struck me was, in many ways, how uncommercial what you're talking about really is. Bad news for Lumosity and some of the other places that maybe spending money on training your brain every month isn't the thing to do, but really much more, as I think Michelle put it, down to the very basics of keeping it very simple and doing in very small steps what's possible to do. I thought that was a very interesting aspect of this. And we heard that from Tony as well when he's talking about the very practical things that can be done, although he is stressing some of the mobile technologies, but many of those, again, now are at a very practical level and will probably be coming down substantially in terms of price and complexity over time. And Robin then talked about how you build this into public policy and design it. And one of the first things that struck me about that was I'm not quite sure how we're going to take a low-tech, do-it-yourself kind of approach and then make it work in a public policy context, which works much better when there's some particular group pushing their product to get it covered in public policy. Nonetheless, I think that these are all really important and interesting elements to talk about. And I'd like to hear a reaction from the panelists, either to each other or to my comments here, that these are pretty basic things that we're talking about. I'm very struck by the relationship between the physical and the mental, and the fact that the evidence really is saying that. That structured social programs that involve individuals are really critical, and that in many ways, this is really a question of figuring out how to bring these things down to the actual practical level of the individual needs that people have every day. So let me just open it first to the panelists to see what their general reaction to that and to the panel and into the comments in general is.
Marilyn, thank you for, this is George Rebuck, thank you for raising, I think, a number of really key issues around this area, particularly with regard to practicality. And I think you raised the issue about, in terms of brain training or cognitive training, you, I think, always have to look at that against a backdrop of a context of an entire lifestyle. That there is a place for cognitive training, but it's not the only answer. It's not the silver bullet. And that we talk about opportunity costs in terms of cognitive training, that if that's what you're going to be doing 24/7, the question arises then, what aren't you doing when you're not doing other things like exercise or socially engaging with friends. And so certainly there is a place for cognitive training, but I think we need to think about it as not something that's going to undo maybe 40 or 50 years of poor living and unhealthy eating habits and poor exercise, that it's something that we have to sort of view in context. And I think we have to have realistic expectations about what cognitive training will actually yield. A lot of the effects that we see are modest. They don't always show up. It's sort of here they are and then they disappear. So I think we're still trying to figure out how to really optimize the effects of cognitive training, and we don't want to overpromise. But even small effects, if you think in terms of sort of leveraging them across the population, may be very important, that you maybe don't need huge effects to really make a difference in individual lives as well as the lives of the population.
Michelle?
This is Robin. I think that's a good point. I think that these are small effects, but we do know that people improve on what they work on. And if that's the case, if we can get them to work on a number of different everyday tasks that will improve their lives and also improve their general cognitive health, if you will, those small effects may lead to long-term improvements in terms of the cost of cognitive support for people later on.
This is Tony, and I just wanted to comment a little bit about the idea of exercise and meaningful activity and those kinds of things around cognitive health. A lot of the research literature in the effect of exercise on cognitive health and a lot of the research literature on meaningful activity in cognitive health comes out of the rehabilitation therapy professions, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy. And because we still, to some extent, follow a medical model in our insurance reimbursement practices in this country. The personalized, individualized approaches that each of these therapies provides to their clients is only provided at a time when they are sick or when they begin to show decline. There's a huge opportunity here for these professions to play a role in wellness as well, and collaborating with psychologists and other professionals. I think that, in terms of policy, might be a big step towards reaching the well elderly and supporting them before they need the supports that we're paid to provide now. So, thank you.
This is Michelle. All great points. This is really an exciting discussion, actually, because, I want to return to a point. I like the idea of wellness promotion because we know, at least for dementias of aging, that, that the pathology starts well before 65, and based on what we know from data. And so the idea that 65 is a magic number and that somehow we should start, stop smoking, start exercising, doing all the good things is sort of a fallacy. It really, the data suggests that, we should be thinking about our health in midlife as well as going into retirement. And with that in mind, it's hard to change behaviors overnight, but we need to be thinking about how this is a process that takes time. It takes time to change behaviors. And the point that sort of was made with regard to the program I described is just one model of how we might make small steps, and that maybe if we if we don't strive for the YMCA membership and we're going to go and we're going to do 3 days a week, which I've tried, and I've failed at repeatedly. I think that if we strive for smaller change, as well as thinking about how do we incorporate it into our wellness program and work with physicians to give them opportunities when a patient comes in and says, what do I do? And I talk to geriatricians all the time who say, tell me, what should I tell them? And because the evidence base, as George mentioned, is somewhat limited, I think our goal is to think about how do we develop an evidence base? How do we help think about cognitive health, and how do we think about it both in terms of in web-based platforms like Lumosity, which may actually get people It may be motivational. The evidence base yet is not there, but they're collecting data. But I think maybe what we should be thinking about is how do we leverage that to then get people to become more confident to go outside and engage. And my experience is that a lot of this is actually about confidence and motivational building as much as it is about remediation. And if you can empower a retired person to think about themselves as not getting stale, but actually getting better if they can share what they have in any way they can, it may be that part of this is also related to, again, finding small opportunities and perhaps working with physician, as Robin said, with a prescription model might empower them. It might say, well, I kind of need to do this. Just like I take my pill each morning, I kind of need to do this for my health. And in the process, if I can find ways to do it in a structured way where I'm actually helping someone, that kind of provides additional motivation. So what I guess I'm trying to say is this might be a multi-tiered approach because changing behavior isn't very, and that's why I think exercise programs usually fall on, we know that from the literature and from workout, perhaps Tony knows more about this, but that memberships rise at Christmas time and then participation falls off. So in February, it's really hard to find a treadmill, but by April, it's really easy to find them. And fairly common practice. So based on findings like that, I think we need to be more creative.
I would like to pick up on this issue of the well elderly, not just the wired elderly, because I think Tony was raising a really interesting point, and Michelle picked up on it a little bit as well, and it's in Robin's list. And that is that in many cases, when people start to become worried about losing mental capacity, they're worried about staying independent, doing things for themselves, remembering things, and so forth, long before they're really technically in a cognitive decline, and that this may be a real opportunity area for improvements in helping people and building back some confidence in terms of continuing to function, of seeing people. I'm sure all of us see people that we know who suddenly become concerned because they can't find their keys 3 times a week, which can happen to all of us. But it becomes more of a cumulative thing than people worry about. But we don't have kind of the intervention or the feeling about intervention until it's later. And I think the point about physical and rehabilitation and occupational therapy is usually only available to someone once they've come, in the case of Medicare, out of the hospital. They can't even just be getting sick. It's largely a major event that's triggered. It doesn't have to be, but that's often what it is. I wonder if you have more thoughts about that.
This is Robin. I have a couple things to say because I think we have 2 levels of motivation that are necessary to get people, to get the well elderly in to work on these things. We need to, I think, first of all, give them that confidence that they can in fact improve. And I think that's a message that not all well elderly or sick elderly have. They don't know that cognitive work can improve cognition. They often accept the stereotypes that are present in our society, and they don't know that they can do something about it. So that's why I emphasize the importance of getting the message out that cognition can be improved. And then the second element, I think, is the motivation element that Michelle has talked more about in terms of the fact that we need to find ways to, once people understand this, to keep them going on their mental activities.
This is Tony, and if I could just tag on to that. One of the things that I think everyone in this room may have had some personal experience of with elderly people and their families is that as people, for one reason or another, whether it's a physical challenge or a cognitive challenge or an emotional challenge, begin to feel that they're not quite the same anymore. They begin to pull back from society. They don't go out as often. They're less engaged in the things that they used to do. And sometimes that happens week to week over a period of years. That is in contraindication to the things we're recommending today, which is social engagement, learning new things, and trying to do something that involves activity. So somehow, and I don't think I have a recommendation for this, but somehow we have to find a way in our communities to maintain the engagement of elderly people as they reach that pivot point.
Yeah, this is George. I think in terms of engaging people, one of the chief obstacles we face in this area is sort of sustainability of involvement in engaging activities and in specifically here in cognitive training programs. And I think we haven't looked enough at, what does motivate people to start a program in the first place, and then how do they weave it seamlessly into their lives. A lot of times these training programs are seen as something separate that you do. It's not sort of interwoven with your sort of everyday activity. And I think I'm not convinced that people are going to start out these training programs and are going to continue using these training programs. I think we have to collect a lot more data on sort of tolerability of the training program, appeal. What does keep people motivated? Is it appeal to maybe altruistic motives like Michelle was talking about, that you're doing training not just because you're worried about your declines in memory, but you're doing training for something broader than that. It sort of goes beyond yourself to maybe you're doing training because it will, help in terms of your family dynamics, or for you to help care for your grandchildren, or for you to help out by maybe incentivizing training, getting some sort of reward that then can be, shared more widely with society. So I think we have to find ways of sort of transcending the individual motivation for, I'm 40 or 50 years old, I'm worried that I'm going to decline. Well, that may be one thing that drives people towards it, but I don't think it's going to be something that keeps people going back again and again and again.
Michelle, you had mentioned in your talk about this importance of engaging with other generations and other people. And I wonder whether we think in many cases that the United States is less of a social country and in terms of how we operate than a lot of other countries where intergenerational activities and social activities seem to be more important and prevalent in some cases. Are there any studies or analyses that people have done about that and its relationship or its potential relationship to keeping seniors more cognitively engaged and active?
Marilyn, that's a really prescient question. It's really important. I'm not sure about the data on that question because I think the challenge up to now has been technological linking behaviors with sort of geography. And I think that now some work that we're developing, but I think others are as well, is thinking about how to use geocoded data to think about what it is about our environments. I think to Tony's slide, we're not just talking about an individual, we're talking about an individual interacting with their environment. And so perhaps one way to think about your question is, what can we learn from thinking about neighborhood barriers and opportunities, and maybe perhaps not being prescriptive, but rather learning a bit more about where activity is occurring naturally. And so some work we're doing, and I encourage you to go to our website, we're trying to start to understand when people are naturally more active, where are they being more active? And then thinking about how we might embed activity, daily activity, into the environments in which they just naturally tend to be. So I'm not answering your question fully, but I think that's one way or one approach where we're trying to use technology in a smart way and in a non-invasive way to learn from individuals how they interact with their environment. And one place actually you might find that we find people often going to be more physically active is not the places that we test for or ask about in our questionnaires. I'd actually ask people if you might know where people are often most active, older adults. It's the mall.
If I could just tag on to
Yeah, so we're learning about that.
I just wanted to tag on just for a second about that. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal just a few days ago about the concept of reimagining retirement as a sort of part-time, Job Corps related opportunity for the elderly to continue to be engaged, helping young people, helping people in society in some way that plays into the work that they've done in the past. And those kinds of models make sense. Because what we know is there's a feedback loop there. Cognitive function improves everyday function, which improves cognitive function. And that's what we have to work on.
I think that's a great point. And I think it helps bring back the idea that as we age, I think something I learned from one of our colleagues, George and mine, Linda Freed, is that perhaps in retirement we may not want to go to a retirement. We may want to go to a retirement community, but we also may want to be in situations where we continue to be engaged with younger generations as well as our own. And in a way, the mall is sort of funny, but in a way that I know my kids go to the mall, and so it could be the mall, it could be a golf course, it could be anywhere. But the idea that intergenerational opportunities, which really do seem to engage older adults, and there's a literature that I wouldn't be appropriate for me to describe because I'm not an expert in that regard. But we do know that helping and working with younger generations does seem to stimulate aging adults and makes them feel more productive and useful. So perhaps one of the answers to the question, building on Tony's point, is that maybe there are natural places in our environment where we can leverage what's already available to us rather than create something whole cloth. And then perhaps we can work with physicians and with community leaders to think about reframing the way they think about these locations rather than trying to create something from scratch. So that's kind of the vision that I think would be fun to explore in a thought experiment, for example.
Tony, you mentioned the importance of technological devices and making them available to individuals. But speaking as someone who's been working with someone who's had some cognitive challenges, the technological themselves can be intimidating to people as well, particularly when they're highly sensitive and you touch the screen and suddenly everything disappears or that's intimidating to me too, but sometimes those things and how you get them to be even more user-friendly. I've been struggling, for example, to try to find a way to make the font size on an iPad get bigger, and it's not an easy task, and it's something that when you think about it, it's supposed to be making things easier. That ought to be just child's play to be able to do. Some of these things are not. Are you seeing advances on the technological side that will really be essentially user-friendly and not just more and more sophisticated over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all do. We all play with these things. The devices are becoming more intuitive, which is a good thing because they're much less complicated to use than they were 5 years ago. And let's hope that continues. I think that as the population ages, this is going to become an even easier thing for us all to learn because those of us who've learned how to use these tools now will be able to learn to use them in the future. The challenge that I have is when I'm working with a gentleman, for instance, who's never used a computer. There's one of my clients is an engineer. He worked his entire life as an electrical engineer and yet had never used a computer. He had an IBM Selectric typewriter at home. And I was trying to get him to use sleep and activity monitors linked to an iPhone so that I could help him manage his health. The solution was it just took long. It just took a little longer. But he was able to think it through and figure it out and make it work. So children, young people can do this instantly. They're born doing it. Older people, it takes a little longer.
Just one more thing before we open it to the audience, and that is I was struck by people talking about, one of the things that people in the healthcare world talk about in terms of patient-centered care now, in many cases, is thinking about asking the patient, here's a radical notion, what their goals are as opposed to having specific goals. And when Robin mentioned designing activities for what people want to improve upon, that's really very much within that realm of where instead of asking someone or talking to someone in terms of on the physical side of what things do you want to be, we want you to walk 3 blocks and climb 4 flights of stairs, et cetera. You ask the person what it is they want to accomplish physically, and oftentimes they have a very specific goal in mind, and I'm sure that would be the case also in the cognitive world. So, Robin, I thought that you might want to jump a little bit more about your feelings about designing for training for what people really want and need.
Well, I think that would, if we could do that, that would greatly encourage the motivational aspects of it. I don't think that, one thing I would like to say is that I don't think older adults need to be motivated solely by intergenerational work. We find in our community that many thousands of older adults use the senior center every week now that we have one. And so this is another place where older adults are very active, even though it doesn't involve intergenerational work. But I think that in senior centers, in adult congregate living facilities, in meal sites, in area agency-on-agency programs, county extension programs, we can find out what kinds of tasks older adults would like to be able to do, perform better. And the ones that people talk to me about are remembering names, especially those people who live in adult congregate living facilities, remembering where they put things, and being able to remember things that they have been told, directions or things they've read that they want to talk to people about. And these are the things that I have focused the most on my training program. But I will admit that we don't have a big national survey to answer that question. I do know that there have been some surveys that have suggested that remembering names is extremely important to seniors, especially those seniors who are socially active. But it would be great to have a national survey that would tell us exactly which tasks people would most like to work on and target our training for those.
Great. I'm going to open the panel to questions from the audience now. And for those of you who are out there, and I know there's someone in the back who's keeping track of that, you do it at health_AIR and #AIR aging. Yes.
Okay, question from Twitter. How do we ensure that low-income older adults, such as those with lower levels of education and lower literacy levels, can get help with cognitive training?
Anybody?
Well, I think there are, a variety of things you can do. I think one of the erroneous beliefs here is that cognitive training to be effective has to be either complicated or expensive, or it has to be done online. A lot of times it's really a simple matter of using simple tools and simple approaches that are really accessible to almost anyone. Going out for a long walk, talking with a friend, discussing a book that you've just read together. That's something that really almost anyone can do, regardless of means. So I don't think that we have to have anything necessarily expensive or complicated or even high tech to be able to reach out to people. We've done cognitive training with older couples where we've actually taken booklets on different memory training programs and sent them home so that each member of the couple could train each other. It's sort of a trainerless training model. And that has been about as effective as actually bringing people in to a class with a specialized instructor. And so someone who can't afford the transportation to come in to take the class or isn't mobile enough to do the class can still benefit by and you're extending the public health reach of that training to low income, perhaps low literacy people. If you've adapted the program, a lot of the programs haven't been adapted for low literacy populations. We have sort of this one size fits all mentality, and so that a lot of work I think still needs to be done in that area. But I think there are many inexpensive alternatives that one can use to reach those populations.
Tony, you wanted to say something?
Just to camp onto that, I think that was a wonderful question, because so many people are looking for the silver bullet of some kind of a cognitive training game, and that's not what we've really been talking about here. So for someone at any income level can do what we talked about, which is trying to learn to do something new that involves other people and activity. So working in a community garden or joining a choir at your local church, volunteering in some way, those are ways that you are doing cognitive training the way we're talking about it, just by doing that.
Great. Yes.
I have a number of points I'd like to make. Hi, I have a number of points that I'd like to make, and I'll try to go through these fairly quickly. One of the things that was discussed was unhealthy eating habits. And although I'm grateful that AIR provided these lunches for us, they're not particularly healthy. And this is not unique to AIR. This is widespread. Every place that I go where a complimentary lunch is offered, it is almost and always, I would say 99% of the time, mostly unhealthy. Okay, offering sodas. Okay, yes, they have water as an alternative, but sodas are unhealthy. Okay, so that's just one example. government cafeterias and vending machines. Okay, I just recently retired from the Department of Health and Human Services. And the cafeterias, all the vending machines offered under unhealthy food. The cafeterias, yes, they offer some healthy alternatives, but why are they offering any unhealthy alternatives? So this is one way to help cognition. My next point is the need for convenient public transportation. Okay? In order, many seniors feel socially isolated because there is no convenient public transportation. As an example, I live in Bethesda, but it took me 2 hours to get here by public transportation. Okay. My next point is secondhand smoke pollution. Yes, not smoking is also important, but secondhand smoke pollution never recognized. We need to have smoke-free bus stops where people waiting for people who don't drive can conveniently, safely wait for a bus without inhaling secondhand smoke. People who go out for a walk, why should they be behind somebody who is smoking, having to hold their breath?
Okay.
So
have one more point?
Okay. Web-based cognitive training. I've tried it. It's extremely boring. It's socially isolating. It causes eye strain. And I don't believe that it has any transfer to brain health.
Okay. Thank you. Up here in the front.
Yes, I have a question on the topic of music. I just watched a fabulous documentary called Alive Inside. I don't know if you've seen it or anyone in here, but I highly recommend it about the
It's called Alive.
Alive Inside.
Alive
about the
Inside.
powerful effects of stimulating the brain, especially in patients with dementia and Alzheimer's. I was wondering if you have any personal experience within cognitive training using music as one of the variables, either as one variable, meaning music that's just randomly selected versus music they know and enjoy, and what's the efficacy of music in the picture of cognitive training, meaning has it been a distraction to them in their ability to concentrate and remember, or based on what a lot of research shows, and Dr. Oliver Sacks' work with music, just how much the brain explodes when you hear a good tune on in the background. Has it improved the results of the cognitive training? Thank you.
This is Tony. I really appreciate you bringing up the idea of music, because I think that there is something magical about music that impacts cognition. And a friend of mine is a professor at NYU in the music therapy department, which is doing research in that area. So there is a music therapy profession that looks at those kinds of things. And just anecdotally, I wanted to comment on another movie. I saw a recent movie about the singer Glenn Campbell, who has Alzheimer's disease. And it was a wonderful movie that looked at his last tour after Alzheimer's had become quite advanced. This is a young man, this is a gentleman who was having tantrums at home. He was unable to remember the names of his children who were members of his band. And yet when he went on stage to perform, it was brilliant. Night after night, he knew every song. He was a brilliant guitar player. Something was preserved because he was a musician. And that is the kind of thing that will give you chills when you do the kind of work that I do.
Michelle?
This is Robin.
Robin, why don't you go ahead, and then we'll get Michelle.
What I was going to say is there is actually research data on cognitive engagement in everyday life, looking at people, asking people how often they do different kinds of activities. And that research shows that those people who engage in more cognitively stimulating activities typically show higher levels of cognition. And those stimulating activities include playing an instrument, dancing for music, but they also include reading books, not watching TV, but attending lectures and speakers and programs, and community engagement and volunteering. Those things are the most associated with cognitive health.
Okay, Michelle?
Thanks, Robin. I've contributed to that literature, and it sort of motivated me to think about your question, which is a wonderful question. I just add to add another point biologically. This is an interesting target, and so doing the research that I do, I think that one area we might think about is the role of an area called the amygdala, which is just anterior to the hippocampus. And we know that some of our most salient memories are formed when they have an emotional salience to them. And so one question I think that neuroimaging and studies will allow us to think about is why music is so powerful. And I think that perhaps based on some research done by some colleagues of mine, not in New York, but up in Boston, suggests, and actually by is that there's something that maybe may help embed memory through a different pathway, but we're not sure just yet. So it's a very exciting area for future consideration. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
The research, does the research look at the good activities of being engaged and eating right and having physical activity, the incremental benefits of things like luminosity? I get the sense that it's either or, and I'm wondering if you have a basic lifestyle that's healthy and you engage with other people and you eat healthily and you have physical activity, what the incremental benefits are of these cognitive games.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that there's more and more attention focused on combining different approaches, and so question would be, does adding a healthy lifestyle and other activities sort of maybe potentiate the effectiveness of some of these training programs? And I think that's an open question. We don't really know if there's incremental effects or maybe even synergistic effects where maybe if we put things together that maybe are just sub-threshold in terms of their effects, but maybe if we combine them all together, they will produce a large effect. And I don't think that, I'm not aware of the research that sort of systematically teased that out with sort of varying, people with different background in terms of their health history, their dietary habits, things like that, and then cross that with different cognitive training programs. We just don't have that research, and I don't think we have sort of the comparative effectiveness research of looking at different programs, not just one cognitive training program, different programs and different modalities of delivery of the programs, coupled with the lifestyle factors that may help in terms of optimizing the effects of those programs.
Maggie, you had a question from online?
Yes, I actually have two. The first one was a follow-up to the low-income adult assistance question. They wanted to ask, older people in high-crime communities often fear going out but can't read well. How would you help them? The second question is a comment on a policy idea that building communities that are walkable and multi-aged would allow people to walk on the street and not drive in the mall.
So, that is a critical question, is how do we make engagement and cognitive stimulation accessible to all, particularly in people in urban areas where we can't prescribe exercise like walking 30 minutes a day at a vigorous or moderate pace, if the sidewalks are lumpy and bricks are sort of torn out of the sidewalks. The program that I mentioned that George and I have worked on actually really wanted to target that question head on. And while it's intergenerational, to Robin's point, it doesn't have to be. We can think of programs that are somewhat functional in getting people to a location. So in the case of Experience Corps that I briefly described, we actually screened for people to have functional literacy at the level of a 6th grade education. And it turns out that that's fairly achievable. So people who may think of themselves as not being prepared to help with literacy enhancement in the schools, as I described in the Experience Corps program, it turns out that they surprised themselves at what they were capable of doing for children. So one, I think that functional literacy is probably something that is not a hard absolute, and such that if we think about what that means and then scaling that to what your population is that you're working with, we might find that people can help other people. The other point with regard to getting outside safely, in the case of the Experience Corps model, we asked them to go to elementary schools in their neighborhoods, which was achievable. And then once they made it to those schools, they could go walk around in the schools. They walked up and down stairs. They walked to and from classrooms. And one thing that we like to reinforce is they got in and out of really little chairs. And that turns out, we didn't design it. We weren't smart enough to figure out that that actually turns out to be functionally really valuable. We found in a pilot study that we increased lower extremity strength, and you need lower extremity strength to walk. So we think that by incorporating activity in functional ways and in safe ways, that we were able to propel them into perhaps more activity on streets where, you do have bumpy areas. So I don't want to overemphasize the importance of a mall. I'm just trying to help myself and others think more creatively about how we enhance activity outside of a swimming pool and a golf course and bowling alleys and things of that nature. So I think, again, I think it's a great, important question, and one I think that George may want to speak more about as well.
Yeah, in terms of reaching out to people who may not be able to get out of their house, I think that there are activities even within your house that you can do that keeps yourself cognitively active in terms of trying to engage socially, trying to challenge yourself in various ways, do different mental games. So I don't think the activity that's done outside the house may be more cognitively stimulating and cognitively enhancing, but it doesn't mean that if you really can't get out of your house, that there are not means to do that, particularly if you do have the capability of connecting via the internet. You could still be involved perhaps in certainly socially connecting with other people via the internet, or there are after-school tutoring programs that have been done with older people that are tutoring children in homework that is done online. That doesn't actually require you to go into the schools to be able to do that. So I think a number of things like that can be done.
Okay. One last question here, or maybe we have time for two.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Carter from AARP. Thanks for pulling this panel together. This has been very informative. I'm wondering if there's any evidence of programs or policies that work at the workplace for the younger, older adults who have not yet retired. If you know of any successful programs that have been put into place.
This may not directly address that question, but one of the programs that's been really, really successful for retired businessmen is the SCORE program, which retired businessmen sign up to teach other people to become entrepreneurs. There's one gentleman I work with now who is 94 years old, and he's been in the SCORE program now for 25 years. He has probably scores of businessmen have become businessmen because of him. So a program like that, I think, is a real opportunity for people who are retiring yet have skills that can help other people bootstrap themselves up.
Yes. Why don't you wait for the microphone? Okay, there you go.
Yeah, getting back to nutrition, wouldn't it make more sense to provide school children with free, healthy lunches so that they would get into the habit of eating healthy food?
Well, I think we've seen some of the controversy around that with Mrs. Obama might have a few things to say about that issue on the panel, that I think she's been trying to do that and gotten a lot of pushback from a lot of people saying kids don't eat that stuff. But I think that the point about it starting early is undoubtedly really important. Does anybody, Tony, you want to say something?
Yeah, if I could just come in on that question. There's a model that's being piloted in New Orleans after all the schools were destroyed after Katrina, that a friend of mine has been a large part of. And what they're doing in that school is not just providing free, healthy lunches, but they're turning the parking lots into gardens. And the children come to school and spend a certain amount of time each day working in the garden. Then they go into the kitchen and actually prepare the food themselves. So they know what a tomato looks like and where it comes from. And that is going to lead, I think, to children who could become adults who actually care about the kind of healthy food that you're talking about. It's only a pilot, but I'd love to see it expanded.
I think what you've heard today are a whole range of opportunities that at high-tech and low-tech levels, people can get involved themselves and help others out. And the interconnectedness and the importance of that is really important here. I think we've also heard that sitting at home in your couch potato state, watching brain games on television is probably not the right way to think about moving forward here. But I would like you all to join with me in thanking the panel today and bringing together a lot of practical suggestions, as well as some things, brain teasers for us to take back and think about how we might change things in the future. Thank you very much.